It's Friday, and of course, we're all looking forward to the weekend, but we are going to be very busy before that. It's going to be a very busy show, in fact, a very packed show for me today. Some of the things I hope to talk about. I saw a story online today from a newspaper here in the state of Idaho that says students are bored. Well, it doesn't quite say that, but it says students. Students feel that there's nothing to do in their own hometowns. They need to be entertained. That's why they need to move away. Apparently, they've never heard of Netflix or Nintendo. Do they still call it Nintendo? It's been a long time for me. Also, some of the other things I've got on the docket today, just a couple of them. I've got a long, long list, but a couple more things. Later in this hour, I expect to be joined by Sean Riley. He is a lobbyist for the National American Legion, and actually he's working in Washington on Capitol Hill. That's where he does his work. He's also a veteran of the Iraqi War. He's going to be reacting today to the story about Brian Williams and stolen valor. Williams claiming that he came under attack during the Iraqi War and making those claims for many, many years before finally backing down this week and saying, I misremembered. Right. Thank you. Someone was sure to get me. I think I would remember. Sean is a great guy. I heard him speak a couple of years ago at my American Legion post back home. Well, son's post for me in that situation. But for Sean, a legitimate member of the American Legion. And I've known his family for many, many years. And another story that has grabbed some headlines today, and I shared this on Facebook today, and I shared it with friends, and the reaction so far has been, I'll put it this way, one of the strongest reactions I've ever seen to anything I posted on Facebook in just a very short period of time. And what I wrote, I just put up a simple message, and I said, the state of Idaho is considering concealed carry without a permit. I said, I favor it. What are your thoughts? And I am getting some interesting responses from people who are checking that out this morning. One of them is a friend of mine. He served in the U.S. Navy for, Navy and Air Force combined for a total of 21 years. Speaking of Washington, that's where he also lives. He used to be stationed for a long, long time at the Navy Yard. Has since retired and lives not too far away from there now. But he was explaining when that shooting took place there a couple of years ago, he said that everyone really should be armed in this country so that they may be able to protect themselves. He is one of the people who chimed in today saying that he thinks it's a great idea. And he said, look, I'm not going to intentionally wave a pistol at anyone just for fun, but he said if someone breaks into my house, they may walk in, but they're going to roll out. And I have been getting responses from people on Facebook from all over the country to that today. Only 5 states actually have this legislation, just 5 out of 50 states. This is from the Associated Press this morning. Idaho residents would be able to carry concealed weapons without a permit under a new bill introduced by the House State Affairs Committee on Thursday. Greg Pruitt with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance said the legislation, dubbed the Constitutional Carry Bill, would not affect enhanced permits like those required to carry concealed weapons on college and university campuses. Our time, 10 after 8 o'clock. We're looking, get this, 53 right now. It's going to be a warm next few days, but expect some rain showers with that too as well. And you could reach our program today at 736-0300. My name is Bill Colley. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can also send me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I spell my last name Colley. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. More on this story from the Associated Press. The panel voted to introduce the bill along party lines, with its 4 Democrats voting no. Is that a knee-jerk reaction from American liberals when anything like this comes up? Oh, gun bad, bad. You look at all the cities in this country that have tried to restrict gun ownership, and they have the highest crime rates in the country. Then you go to a place like Plano, Texas, which is a fairly good-sized city between Fort Worth and Dallas. I have a friend from high school. She lives there. Plano, Texas has some of the most unique gun laws in the country, something similar to what we're proposing here. Plano has one of the lowest gun crime rates in the country. Why? Because a guy walking up to someone on the street or in a shop on the corner knows he may get his own brains blown out. Now, what a deterrent that happens to be. But liberals remain in denial on these issues. Democratic Representative Elaine Smith from Pocatello raised concern that the bill did not require any formal training to carry a weapon. Pruitt responded that Idaho residents are generally very responsible with their guns. So the idea is you see, the Second Amendment doesn't mention anything about formal training. Have you noticed that? You've read it, right? I mean, I know that you're all up to speed on this, especially you lefties out there who continually want to talk about ripping it to pieces and using it for toilet paper. but it says it shall not be abridged. It's pretty clear that, there's no conditions with this or contingencies. The other part of this is most of the people that I know who've owned firearms, and of course, most states you don't need a permit if you want some long rifles or some shotguns. And when we were kids and we used to go out hunting, our parents taught us how to do that, and they taught us to be careful. So what's the worry here? Most people who would be actually walking around with concealed carry are likely people who have spent a great deal of time on a firing range or target shooting, and they know a little bit about safety. It's not as if everyone's just going to go out and say, hey, I'm going to go get me a pistol and then I'm going to blow somebody's brains out. If people think that, they're already doing it. Those are called criminals. They're the people who go into to stores and other places and stick them up and steal money and sometimes shoot people while they're doing it. And they've been with us, whatever the law happens to be, since the beginning of the Republic and even before. It's 8:13. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is called Top Story. I have a couple of emails in already. None on this topic, though, yet, but I would assume that there are people out there who understand it's going to be a big fight. And what you're going to see happen is the big newspapers across the state of Idaho are going to start wetting their pants and, getting their knickers in knots, and they'll start editorializing about this, how bad it is. Newspaper folks try to tell you that, that you need to be controlled. That's their view. Therefore, the big government programs that we have, and therefore the expansion of the surveillance state and all of those things, because they feel you need to be controlled. Unless, of course, you're a Muslim, then you can't be controlled. You've got to be let alone as part of some sort of reparations project, because we've been mean to them through colonialism and Christianity. As the president said yesterday, Christianity has been going around roasting people for a long, long time. So he's apologizing for what's happening in that part of the world. But I'm telling you right now, there will be opposition from these newspapers, but with the newspapers really dying off, there's going to be very, very little opposition. There was a guy named Carl Rowan who worked for a newspaper called the Washington Post, Pravda on the Potomac, as a columnist for a couple of decades. He's been dead now for about 15 years. But Carl Rowan was a big, big gun control or gun confiscation freak. That's all he would ever write about in his column, or mostly all he would ever write about. One hot summer night, he woke up and he heard some teenagers splashing around in his pool. They didn't realize he was home. This has been a common thing that's gone on for years across the country. Some of the neighborhood kids crawl over the fence, jump into the pool to cool off on a hot night. Carl Rowan, who was Mr. Gun Confiscation, pulled out a pistol and shot one of those kids. Now, the young man apparently didn't die, which is a good thing, because Rowan would have ended up going to prison and dying there instead of in his own bed. But Rowan, after he was given a suspended sentence at court, walked out, looked at the assembled media and said, I know this might make me look like a hypocrite, but I would disagree with that. Hello? You've gone around saying other people shouldn't own firearms, and you're going around shooting people for taking a swim in your backyard. Wonderful. And then they whine and claim that we're dangerous. Well, I certainly think that the only danger is amongst themselves. Maybe they think everybody else is just like them, and that we all have this devious, double-talking evil streak in us. I suppose to some degree that's true, but maybe not as much as they're offering. So bringing all of this up today, I just think it's a worthwhile point, and I think if it passes, and I think it's got a good chance of doing that, especially with some of the other gun-friendly legislation that has made it through the state legislature, I think you're going to see a lot more people on the streets walking around. And I was just reading the AP Wire today about a shooting in another part of the state, and charges pending there in a homicide. And it struck me, again, if someone had been armed and someone comes up to you and, suddenly thinks they're going to put the drop on you, but if they don't know whether you're carrying or not, I think that even if it's a slight chance, if it improves your odds of survival just slightly because you may be carrying, I'll take that chance. I'll take it, because I don't think that anybody else out there can offer me any quicker and faster protection than me being armed and ready to defend myself in a split second. It's 8:16. We mentioned earlier the weather is... Last week we had a weather forecast that said it was going to cool down this week with mostly sunny skies, but it would be down into the 30s during our daytime highs. And then that got quickly readjusted, and we had daytime highs in the 50s and approaching 60 a couple of days, but we had rain showers with that. A couple of days ago, the weather forecast said, yeah, but a great weekend is going to be ahead. The rain is going to clear out on Thursday, and with that, we're looking at temperatures in the mid-50s and some warm overnights, but a clear weekend. Well, that's not the case. It turns out that the weekend now is looking very, very wet. Just to let you know, if you've got plans for the weekend, take an umbrella or a raincoat along in this particular situation. Now, it may not rain all of the time. We're not looking at all-day downpours, but there's a 40% chance tomorrow. And at the moment, it's 54. When I left the house this morning, it was 56 according to the temperature gauge on my Jeep. Now, we may drop down a couple of more degrees right around the sunrise here this morning, but don't expect it to get a whole heck of a lot cooler before this day is out. And some of the other things I've mentioned that we have coming up, we have a couple of guests dropping by from the College of Southern Idaho in just a couple of minutes, and they're going to be talking to us about just some sporting events going on this weekend. Basketball season's wrapping up, college basketball seasons around the country. These folks, of course, probably aren't going to be invited to the big dance. It doesn't happen at a college this size. But still, it's exciting to talk to them, and there's some good basketball going on, and they'll share some of that with us. Then about 8:40 this morning, I'm going to be talking with Sean Riley. As I mentioned earlier, Sean is an Iraqi war veteran. I happened to be in Rotary with his father years and years ago, and that's how I got to know the family. And when I was in Rotary with his dad, I believe Sean was still serving overseas in Iraq. And he came home, and after coming home, he got hired as a lobbyist. And I know that's not a great word in a lot of cases. When you hear lobbyist, you're thinking about these people who are walking around in double-breasted suits, and they're going around passing out large wads of cash or favors to people in Washington. And I'm saying campaign contributions, otherwise they'd call it a bribe. If you call it a campaign contribution, it's still a bribe, but it's not illegal. You see how that works? But for the National American Legion, that's his job, is to go around Capitol Hill and impress upon legislators the needs of our fighting men and women and the veterans, too, in this country. So Sean is scheduled to join us just a short while on the program from his office in Washington. And I'll point out, he has some, I'm sure, strong thoughts about Brian Williams, the anchor and news editor at NBC Nightly News, who this week had to admit that he's been putting his foot in his mouth for many, many years, claiming that he had been under fire while he was covering the Iraqi war way back in 2003. More details coming up on all of these stories in just a few minutes. But first, some messages from some of our fine sponsors. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a guest joining us from the College of Southern Idaho. A lot going on over at CSI every week, especially, too, on weekends. But we were just having an off-air conversation, which sometimes the off-air conversations are sometimes actually better than what you hear over the air. Ella Donahue joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we were talking a little bit about truck driving in just the last couple of minutes off air, because a big course coming up in actually driver safety, right?
Yeah, what they're going to do is they're going to have the Sage Truck Driving Company job fair come in, and it's going to be from 11 to 4 p.m. next Thursday in the Taylor Building. They're going to have representatives from a dozen local truck driving companies to answer questions about the jobs they offer, and then they're going to help you earn your CDL certificate in as little as 4 weeks.
We were talking off air. I mean, truck driving is a very, in some cases, lucrative way to make a living. The people who do it, especially long-haul people and the like, paid very, very well.
Oh, yes.
And you mentioned your own family. You have some truckers in the family, too, as well.
Yes, my father would do trucking stuff because he owned his own construction company, and we have 2 big rigs.
I can imagine he's a tough guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Construction company, that pretty much says it all.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who'd like to know more about that, what should they do? Should they just show up, or is there someone they should contact first?
No, they can go ahead and show up next Thursday, 11 to 4, or you can also go on csi.edu to find more information if you're curious.
Okay, and there's no cost just to go to this first meeting? Okay, and from that you can just pick up some things, any information, and maybe make a decision on whether you want to pursue this or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you also have a couple of other things going on that just sound like flat-out fun. Valentine's Moonlight Snowshoe Trip to the South Hills.
Yes, with the CSI Outdoor Program on Saturday the 14th. Even if you've never been snowshoeing before, this could be a fun trip for the 2 of you. Call Krista in the CSI Outdoor Program to sign up. Just $20 per couple, and that includes your transportation and equipment. So call 732-6697 right away to sign up.
Do you know if there's actually snow there?
I have no idea. I've never actually been to the South Hills yet. I'm too busy.
I wonder if you could do sand snowshoeing. That would work as a replacement. I mean, the consistency is probably the same.
Probably.
I have not done any snowshoeing in a long, long time, and I will say it's a workout to do it. But,
I bet. I bet.
If you have the right size shoes, I mean, and that was depending on the type of snowshoeing you're doing, you could have a long, narrow shoe or you could have a wide, short shoe. And it's all based on the consistency, I guess, of the snow that you're walking on. I know that many, many years ago, I used to walk the dog and we'd sometimes have a freeze and then some rain on top of the snow and you'd get that crusty snow. And the dog wouldn't go through it. But of course, every step I would take crunch and I'd drop about 6 inches.
Yeah.
Dog absolutely loved it, though.
I had that over Christmas break in the swales of the land and the ranch. It was deep. It would go up to my thigh.
Yeah, and you know what? It's like being in one of those movies. What was it with? Oh heck, I watched this movie as a kid. It was about a mountain man played by Robert Redford, and he was wading in snow always up to his thighs or his waist. And I used to think to myself, looks like fun when you're watching it, but when you're doing it,
it's not fun.
Yes.
It's not fun.
A big event coming up too at the observatory.
Yes, you have 2 opportunities to look through the telescope at the Herritt Center next week. The first is Telescope Tuesday, of course, on Tuesday night at 7. Admission is just $1.50 per person. And Saturday the 14th, Valentine's Day, is the free monthly star party from 7 to midnight. Come and go as you please. Admission is free, and they're both going to be at the Centennial Observatory in the Herritt Center.
It's not really, when you mention the price on that, when you think about what it would cost just to even go to a movie matinee today, this is a real bargain.
$8. Yeah, this is fantastic. And if the skies allow, it's going to be beautiful.
I would hope that they would. The rainy season should come to an end, you would think, sometime soon, but it doesn't look like it's in any hurry at this point. And then we have basketball this weekend as well.
Yes, it's going to be one of your last chances to watch the Golden Eagles basketball team on their home court. The CSI women host North Idaho at 3 p.m. tomorrow, followed by a matchup between the number 3 ranking CSI men and the North Idaho men at 5 p.m.
Is that somewhat of a big rivalry with North Idaho?
I believe Snow College was a bigger rivalry, but
Okay.
I don't know as much because I don't get to follow that either because I just go to work and I do homework and I try to get as much sleep as possible.
Yes. Students getting sleep is somewhat of a rarity, isn't it?
Yeah. I need my sleep. So, basketball or sleep kind of always wins.
I occasionally would go to a basketball game when I was in college, and occasionally we had a hockey team as well. I'd go watch them play because friends were on the team. But you're right. You're so tied up with other things. Sometimes it's mainly the parents who are coming out and doing all of the screaming.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, when I get to be a parent and stuff and I'm not in school anymore, maybe I'll go more. But right now, I'm just like, even though it's free, it's like I have too much homework.
Unless you're truck driving, and then you'll be on the road all the time.
Exactly. So I don't know what's going to happen.
And for people who actually are going to a ball game, it's an opportunity, I guess, to cheer on the local team. And again, we're not talking about a big outlay of cash for anyone here.
No.
Fairly simple to get in and see a ball game. And
then if you're a CSI student with your CSI sticker, you can get in for free.
Okay, even
You don't
better.
get that opportunity at Boise State football. Just saying.
Yeah. Tickets there are a little bit more hard to come by, though, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Even the students, I mean, it's a cheaper price, but they still got to pay. You get in for free here.
There you go. And that's even for part-time students.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ella, we want to thank you for coming by today.
Thank you.
Ella is doing the shuffle between studios this morning. So I was just down the hall asking Kelly, I said, is she going to be captive here? And no. She's got a few minutes. But I think you're on the move still this morning, right?
Oh, no, I just got to go to work, and then I got to go to school, and then I got to go to a leadership academy.
You just finished work.
I know, right?
Thank you much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Coming up on 8:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Sean Riley from the American Legion going to be joining us in about 10 minutes. Stick around. I think what we could say, after being joined by our last guest is that there are a great many opportunities for people who are students at the College of Southern Idaho. But at some of the other institutions or institutes of higher learning in the state, apparently people don't feel that they're being quite entertained enough. The Lewiston Tribune has a story, a writer named William L. Spence. University of Idaho students survey absence of entertainment options, job opportunities behind rural exodus. Of course, small-town America has been emptying out for decades. Since about 1940, we've seen this huge change, and culturally people are moving off the farms. One of the reasons simply is you don't need as much farm labor to produce the same amount or same volume of crops or whatever else it is that you're producing. And so if you don't have jobs for everyone in the family, they have to find another line of work. And then if you go down to Main Street, and everyone used to have, when I was a kid growing up, and I tend to believe it wasn't all that long ago, There was a woman who sold dresses. She had a dress store right in town. And I just got to tell you, I've got to be upfront about it. You had a local guy or two who sold hardware, and all of these things were going on. And I think that what we have to point out is that that's all done too because of the big box stores. So people are being driven away. But as I was reading the story, it struck me when they say a dearth of entertainment, that is a lack of entertainment going on in small towns, is one reason they're leaving. Why do they expect that they're going to be constantly entertained? Because between us, and I was growing up in a small town. The movie theater had closed by the time I was still in grade school, so there was no place to go to see a movie on weekends or Friday nights from the time I was probably 10 years old on. And you could go down to the local basketball court. There were a couple of them actually in town. And you could either shoot hoops, and in the winter, one of them, we played hockey on it. And you could occupy yourself just hanging around with your friends in the backyard. My brother and I, when we were kids, there was a time we were living. My dad was remodeling a house and we hadn't yet moved into it. And there was a time when we were living in a mobile home for a couple of years while my dad happened to be working on the house. And there were only 10 trailers in the entire lot. And we heated the mobile home with propane gas. And out of those 10 trailers, there may have been 3 other children in the neighborhood. All of them were much younger than we were. I think I was 10 maybe, and my brother was 8. And the other kids happened to be ranged from anywhere from about 3 until 6. So we didn't have a lot in common with them. My brother and I often entertained ourselves as children. We would climb atop that propane tank. Not that it was dangerous or anything like that, but we would pretend it was a horse. And you had to invent things, but if you have that sort of imagination, it's a pretty valuable thing. And I don't know that kids any longer have the imagination because they've been spending all of their time playing video games and the like. Someone else is doing the imagining for them. So it seems that the type of things we did as kids, where we would go over to the next door neighbor's house and just play ball in the backyard. And we had a vacant lot behind some of the houses in the neighborhood. We could go over there and we could play football constantly, or we played football in an old abandoned railroad yard. And that's all we did, day after day after day. And you couldn't wait to come home from school so you could have a pickup game. But this notion somehow that they need to be entertained. In the 1960s and 1970s, we had no internet. We didn't have cable in my hometown until I was well into my teens. So we had a limited amount of television choices. We couldn't sit there on the computer. When I was in high school, the first Atari games started coming out, Pong as well. That was exciting, wasn't it? A boop, 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 boop. But we thought it was great. I mean, the few times we got to play it, it was like amazing that something like this could actually be on your TV set. And then Atari came along with Tank Battle, where you had these little glowing things that were supposedly tanks, and you'd shoot back and forth from around barriers at various people and try to blow up more of their tanks than yours. And that was the extent of video games, but they were still rather unique and very rare in the late 1970s. So we had to do other things. Today, they've got the internet. They've got all sorts of video games. They've got their own cell phones loaded with apps. I don't know that they should have their own cell phones, but a great many of them do. So this is what we happen to be looking at. They've got Netflix. They've got just tremendous, even in rural areas, tremendous opportunities for entertainment. And they're complaining that they have to leave because there's nothing to do. What sort of entertainment are you going to find in the big city? Well, you're going to find you don't know anybody, so you're going to sit around your apartment and you're going to play video games, watch Netflix and cable TV. Seriously, I mean, what's the difference between where you grew up and the big city? If you felt there was nothing to do there and you get to one of these big lonely cities, you're going to be doing the same dang thing. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm at a loss sometimes when it comes to some of these people and what they have in their way of expectations. Jobs, on the other hand, I do understand that situation. I don't care where you go in this country. It is difficult for young people to find work. And I would imagine in many rural communities, when I was a kid growing up, we had a factory or two right in town. We had a factory that made battery chargers, we had a cookie factory, and we had a cheese factory. If somebody needed a job, somebody was always hiring because just over the next hill there were more factories. They're all gone now. Got to ask your government what they can do about that or why they did it to us in the first place. Great guest coming up in just a few minutes. Sean Riley, Iraqi war veteran, going to be talking with us about Brian Williams and Brian Williams' faux pas when it comes to claiming he was under fire during the Iraqi war. That's on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on NewsRadio1310.com, NewsRadio1310 KLIX. I had mentioned earlier in the program that we have a guest joining us today, and probably one of the biggest headlines of the week across America has been NBC News anchor Brian Williams fessing up that he indeed had not come under fire while covering the Iraqi war in 2003. Now, it looks as if Williams is going to remain on the job. People close to him say that's because, or close to the situation, that his network can't afford to lose him. In other words, they don't really have anybody who could bring in quite as large an audience that he currently does. Still, a lot of people are uncomfortable, and his credibility may have been irreparably harmed by what has taken place. I'm joined right now by a friend on the telephone, and as I mentioned earlier, and I just want to make clear, he is a lobbyist for the American Legion at the national office in Washington. He is not, however, speaking today, though, as a spokesman for the Legion, because that job is handled by someone else, and those people are already talking to various media around the country. But Sean Riley is a veteran of the Iraqi war, and he has a great many friends he is still in contact with after having actually been in a war zone and actually having fought for his country. And he may have a rather unique perspective individually on this particular situation. Sean, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I guess the last time we did this was you were writing a piece about a monument in Plattsburgh, Maryland. The last time we talked on the radio, and you had just written a piece for a national publication at the time about a war memorial that you've got some people who believe that it should be taken down. What was that, last May or so?
That's correct. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And since of course my move, we haven't really had a chance to talk a whole heck of a lot. But
right. Yeah, you've got a lot going on for sure.
Yeah. Since this story broke this week, I was sitting at my desk this morning before the show, and I got to thinking. I wondered what your particular input would be on it. But first of all, we do want to mention you do write for some national publications. Could you share that with people?
Sure. The names of the publications, you mean, or?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I've been published at National Review, which is a large national publication on the right side of things, and I also fairly regularly contribute to a smaller publication, an online journal actually called The Imaginative Conservative, and others here and there as they pop up. I don't know if you know this, Bill, but I recently started a PhD program in political theory with a minor in American government at the Catholic University of America.
Right. In fact, I've been there to visit. I think you were the first person to tell me I needed to go take a look at the cathedral there, or the basilica.
That's right. Yeah, it's the largest in the Western Hemisphere, I believe.
And so I took your advice on it, and I was just bowled over. And of course, National Review, Rich Lowry, if people are familiar with that name, Rich is, of course, I guess the editor of that particular publication.
That's right. Yeah, he currently is. Of course, Bill Buckley famously was the original editor.
Now, you served in Iraq back in, I guess it's been probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years since you've come home, right?
Yeah, I was there in 07, 08. I was part of the Maryland National Guard's brigade that deployed there as part of the surge back in 2007, 2008, when General Petraeus, instigated the surge strategy to sort of attempt to tamp down some of the insurgent action that was going on there, and controversially, but it appears to be fairly successfully. Although since we've gotten out in 2012, things have seemed to have taken a turn for the worse.
Putting it mildly. Well, this week, Brian Williams, who'd been sharing this story, I guess, it's funny. Originally, when he reported the story in 2003, it was truthful, but then he went on David Letterman's show a few years ago and told a different story, and then he told it again last week. What is the reaction from just you and the people you served with when you hear something like that?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, this I hadn't even been aware that he had made these comments. I was sort of vaguely even aware of who he was, frankly. But I was actually most aware of him through the videos that came about where people were piecing together things that he said to sing various songs. I don't know if you saw this thing. But anyway, a viral video. But at any rate, so my initial reaction is not a big deal. So what? But then, kind of on further reflection, it is a little bit. On one hand, I guess I would say I can sort of understand the impulse because, in America, thankfully, since the Vietnam War, we have done a lot better at making our gratitude to our veterans known. So on one hand, it's understandable to want to sort of identify with that, and in a weird way, it's sort of flattering, I suppose. But in another sense, it certainly is not the same thing, and is not acceptable to embellish your experiences, whether you're in the military or not. Of course, we have the legislation now that it's called the Stolen Valor Act, which actually can result in criminal charges for people who take on the persona of or take credit for things that they have not done in the military. So and it is a very serious thing, and it's very serious because we thankfully hold our service members and veterans with such high esteem in this country that when that starts being taken by people who don't deserve it or didn't earn it, it can be detrimental to the overall what's the word I'm looking for, aura, I guess, that's kind of surrounds military service.
Well, I heard someone say the other day that they thought perhaps what he was trying to do was at least explain the heroism of the people who were around him, and that perhaps he thought by changing the story, it indeed made them even look larger, as if you'd have to do that, than perhaps actually the action was at the time.
Yeah, I mean that's one explanation, I suppose. And again, I certainly understand kind of the impulse to do that. I mean, I find for myself that most civilians think that if you just joined the Army, that you're automatically on the front lines, right? It's not well understood that, while I was an infantryman, it's not well understood that most jobs in the Army are not even combat jobs, and that most of your time, even in a combat zone, is not directly engaged with the enemy. The kind of the classic description of military life is long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of extreme terror, which is pretty accurate from my experience. And so I say that to say that most civilians, without kind of having an understanding of what military life is actually like and what sort of even being in a combat zone is actually like, it can be very easy to kind of play on that ignorance in such a way that it makes it sound like you've done more than you've done or something like that. So I mean, again, I certainly understand the kind of the temptation to do that. But again, I don't want to say, I don't want that to mean or to sound like I'm saying that this is excusable. Again, it's a very even in some cases a criminal offense to do this and to wear the ribbons and the medals that are awarded for great acts of heroism in combat, right?
Our guest is Sean Riley, and he's joining us this morning at 8:52 on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, Sean is a veteran of the Iraqi War. There was a movement, from what I've been reading the last couple of days, I've seen it on a couple of conservative publications, petition really going around calling for NBC to fire him. Do you think that he's been contrite enough to the point that we should just let it go? I read this morning in a story in the Washington Examiner where a lot of veterans just said, all right, it's done, it's out of the way, let's forget about it. Or do you think that, that perhaps we need to send a strong message here and say this guy has to go?
I mean, my personal take on it is that in the scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal, and he is, has been contrite. He understands that what he's done is problematic. So at this point, I would leave it up to the discretion of the network to determine that. The official position of the American Legion is that his contrition, while what he's done is bad, but his contrition is sufficient, and I tend to agree with that. with that take. Again, it's not, it doesn't excuse what happened, but I think most people understand that this is not okay. And so, I think that it's sufficient for me personally. Now that view may not be shared by all veterans, but for me, it's not the kind of thing I want to dwell on or spend a lot of time thinking about.
I think, in fact, as you bring that up, when you mentioned at the beginning, you didn't know who he was. You're the second person in the last 2 days who's told me that. And these old Alphabet Network TV anchors aren't the names that they used to be. It's a bit like astronauts today. They're not quite as well known as they were 40, 50 years ago. And that
Right.
a lot of people get their news in other places. So the actual impact of what he's done might be considerably less than, let's say, if Walter Cronkite had done something like this.
No question. And I mean, I think that unfortunately, things like the Dan Rather scandal a few years ago has gone a long way toward sort of bringing them down a peg. And of course, the proliferation of the internet and whatnot. For me personally, and I think this is true of many people my age and younger. I don't even have TV. I watched my wife and I watch Netflix. We pay $17, whatever it is, a month. For that, and I'm not even interested in getting my news from those the big networks any longer. So I think that they are irrelevant in a way that they haven't been since probably the advent of television.
I was going to say, if you're watching Netflix, you're looking to see if you pop up as a character on House of Cards sometime, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I love that show. I would say it's somewhat accurate, but in the same way that as a veteran, I can still enjoy watching war movies. And as a lobbyist, I can still enjoy watching those, even though accuracy may be strained at points.
Good literature, but not necessarily the truth. Well, Sean,
There you go.
I'd like to thank you for taking some time with us this morning. I know it was short notice and all, and
Sure.
I was able to mention to a few friends that you were back home, that you were going to be on this morning, and so apparently, you may have some friends who'll be giving you a critique a little bit later in the day, or either that or a pat on the back and a way to go.
Well, hey, I'm always glad to show up for you, Bill. You've been a good friend of my family and I for a while, and I appreciate you, and I hope that the move is everything that is working out for you, everything that you hoped it would be, and and let me know next time.
See, I think your dad would say sometimes I've been a good friend, but when he was serving as party chairman back home, sometimes he may have thought otherwise.
Well, that's probably true, but hey, when you're party chairman, you gotta kind of roll with the punches, and I think by and large he did a pretty good job, and it's the kind of thing where hey, it's you kind of got to do things that aren't going to make everyone happy all the time. But
yeah, all of his candidates won. I mean, when that happens, I think you can say that job well done.
I totally agree. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's the point. And he went ahead and stepped down, as you know. I think he's had enough. But yeah, I mean, I think he did a lot. Whatever the particular debates were at that point, I think that the record speaks for itself. So there you go.
Well, hey, have a great weekend, and I'll be in touch at some point. I know if something else comes along.
I would love to. And don't forget, I'm a PhD candidate too, so I can speak from that side too. So hey, let me know.
Yeah, you got a lot going on.
Absolutely.
All right, take care, sir. Good speaking with you.
Good speaking with you too.
All right, now Sean Riley joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we're speaking about the Brian Williams situation this morning. As I say, he is a lobbyist for the National American Legion in Washington on Capitol Hill and the like, but he was not speaking as a spokesman, but rather as a war veteran today, and about his reaction to that whole situation. We have one more hour of the show coming up. Some economic news out today, and Wall Street is not reacting in a happy manner. We'll talk about that a bit in the next hour of the program, right here on Top Story with Bill Colley, 53 at 8:59. I was just thinking, as a corollary to what we were talking about in the last segment of the show, And that is that situation with Brian Williams at NBC News and putting his foot in his mouth and then trying to figure out the best way to extricate it. There is a piece today at Media Research Center written by Dan Gaynor, and it says 7 ugliest media shots at American sniper hero Chris Kyle. He goes on to say that all of the movie reviewers and the networks are praising 50 Shades of Grey, which, as I understand, is a very vulgar movie. So the movie about an actual American hero is being panned, and yet they're telling you to go out and watch this movie about sex toys, which 20 minutes of the movie is just entirely devoted to. We have some folks, I don't think, looking to join us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you. Our telephone number 736-0300. And I think our caller, we've got to try another line here. And you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story. What's on your mind?
Well, I went and watched American Sniper, and I thought it was a very good show, and it gave you a pretty good idea of what our troops go through on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And I haven't seen anything in the movie of everybody's complaints. But as far as the guy in the helicopter, the reporter, do you really think that he's felt bad about it? Because according to some journalists that have really dug deep, he's still lying, because he said he was in the helicopter right behind the one went down, when in fact the records from the military show that he was 1 hour behind.
And
so
secondly,
he didn't even see it happen.
There was a comment I saw this morning from one of the actual folks who happened to be on the chopper that was hit, that it may not actually have been an RPG but small arms fire that they took. So his story has been growing and growing and growing, and in unusual ways. Yeah,
but what my point is you got, you asked if he should be fired or not. Well, he's still lying. He won't admit that he didn't even see it happen. They landed after the fact, and then he just implanted himself into the whole situation.
And this is, for the news media, devastating, and especially if they keep him on at NBC, because every time you hear folks on the American right say that they think that we've got a lot of fibs going on, a lot of people just outright lying in media or biased, this really just, you take a highlighter and you just put that highlighter right across the bottom of it and say, there you go, here is Exhibit A.
Yeah, this is just a good example of them blowing things out of proportion to make what they feel is good news and leaving it at that. The ends justify the means. It's baloney. They need to report on the truth and let us decide what we want to hear.
I can't agree more. I think that we're looking at a situation where I think that we've got an individual who has pretty much showed us, he's pulled the curtain back, exactly what goes on in establishment media in this country. And yet, his fellow travelers are circling the wagons, mostly around him. The Boston Globe this morning, which at one time was a sister paper to the Bible of American liberalism, the New York Times, it went bankrupt and the Times sold it off for a few pennies. But the Boston Globe has a headline today. I happen to see this online, and it says, the reason that this is so difficult to take is because Brian Williams is like America's dad. So, well, all right. So if dad is a liar, an adulterer, an embezzler, I don't know how. I never thought of him as America's dad. And I've seen the ratings for these network newscasts, these old line alphabet networks. They're abysmal compared to what they used to be. So again, no one's actually watching the guy. What is this America's dad crap all about? It doesn't make any sense. But you see, they live in such a bubble that they do not understand that the rest of the world is not hanging on everything this man does or says, or all of his appearances on David Letterman or 30 Rock, and what a great jovial individual he is, backslapper and all of that. And they have totally missed out on all of this. Dana Perino told a story on Fox, on The Five, about a year ago. And when she was working for President Bush as press secretary in the latter days of the second Bush administration, she said that one of the major anchors on the old alphabet news networks used to mock, right on Air Force One, would sit there in his seat and mock the way the president talked. Because that Midland, Texas accent, American, or however he would pronounce it, American, And she said that this anchor would sit there on the plane and continually mock the way the president talked and thought it was hilarious. Now, I got thinking about who that would be. If it was at the time Diane Sawyer was still at ABC, she's been replaced by David Muir. I worked with David in local TV back in the late 1990s, and let me tell you, I don't think he'd ever be wrapped up in something like this. But you had two other choices. You had Scott Pelley, I believe, at CBS, and then you had Brian Williams. So it wasn't Diane Sawyer, so that leaves it as either Scott Pelley or Brian Williams. My guess is it was Brian Williams sitting on the plane trying to get laughs by mocking the president. Whether you liked him or not, the point of the matter is you're riding on his airplane, but you may also be showing outwardly your bias. And I don't have any doubt that he is a flaming liberal in real life, and he's been caught with his pants down. And all of a sudden, as I say, his fellow travelers are trying to circle the wagons, and they just hope it all goes away. But you know what? This just makes it more and more difficult for people to believe them and have any trust in what they do. 9:13, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. I wrote a piece about this, and there's actually a link to it. If you go to our KLIX Facebook page, you can actually see it there. I wrote a piece about Brian Williams just yesterday, and it's posted there. It's also posted at LinkedIn. But giving some of my thoughts, having worked inside television news, and I actually know some of the people now who work at the network level, I haven't had a lot of contact with them in the last 10 or 15 years. But I'm telling you, it is a cesspool. Let's just put it that way. And if you'd like to check that out, take a look at our Facebook page, and you'll be able to find some details on it there. I also have a couple of other posts, too, recently about same-sex marriage, as well as the burning of the Jordanian pilot the other day. And of course, as President Obama made sure yesterday, he made sure that he backed off that one very quickly. Did you hear about his comments? Remember he got spanked at the National Prayer Breakfast a couple of years ago by Ben Carson? And the media immediately said, oh, this is the wrong place for people to take the president on. I mean, well, I don't know why it's wrong. And especially when it comes to matters of faith, because the man doesn't seem wholly faithful. But he got up in front of the crowd yesterday and said, oh, well, we can't complain about what ISIS does too much because Christians have done all of these things. Except that Christians haven't done these things in several hundred years. And in fact, no Christian alive today is doing any of these things. So why does he keep throwing these things out here? Why not just, go in there and blow the living daylights out of these people and get rid of them once and for all? And I think he's tipping his hand when he does something like that. There was a great comment about it that I happened to see made by Franklin Graham, and Franklin Graham just came right out and said there's a huge difference the president should know about. Jesus came to earth as a peacemaker. Muhammad was a killer. Do you need to know any more? Mr. Obama, according to the Washington Times today, denied the Jordanians' use of Predator drones, which would save lives, at least Jordanian lives, if any of these drones were shot down versus a pilot in an actual plane, because we now know what will happen to pilots who are shot down. But according to the lead story, Rowan Scarborough writing it today in the Washington Times, Obama denied request from Jordan for Predator drones in Islamic State fight. Whose side is the man on? Heck, the Muslim king of Jordan is more an American than the Muslim king of the USA, if you want to look at it that way. Peggy Noonan writing today at the Wall Street Journal, recrimination is not a plan. These are charges, not answers, and they are getting us nowhere, she says, when it comes to people saying, well, Bush did this and Bush was wrong, or the people who say, well, Obama was wrong in pulling us out of the area. And our last guest, who happened to take part in the surge, alluded to that in the last segment of our program. He was there. Ask the people who were there what they think of it. At the National Prayer Breakfast, she writes, Thursday, the president airily and from a great height explained to the audience that ISIS exists within a historical context that includes the Inquisition, slavery, and Jim Crow. People committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ, he said. And in other words, he's saying, oh, the Western world is a big hypocrite. She says, this is just the moment to dilate on Christendom's sins, isn't it? While Christians are being driven from the Mideast, he always says these things as if he's the enlightened one facing the facts of the buried past, instead of the cornered one defeated by complexity, hard calls, and ambivalence. In other words, he doesn't want to have to make a choice on this one. He wants to keep working under the table dealing with the Iranians, who are building a great big nuclear bomb, and he doesn't want to disturb that, so he doesn't want to go in here and take out the bad guys. So he turns around and said, oh, you Christians are just as bad too. Well, yeah, okay, you've been dead for a few hundred years, but you're just as bad. I don't get it. I don't understand where this man is coming from, and why doesn't someone take him down a peg? Franklin Graham has tried in the past, and Franklin Graham was then attacked by establishment media, which 60 some odd percent of reporters recently surveyed who work around the White House and in Washington say that they believe the government is surveilling them under orders from President Obama and Eric Holder. And yet, every opportunity they get, they go back and they protect their abuser. Stockholm Syndrome? I don't know how you explain it, but for some reason, they're all on board with all of this. Also today, we got a couple other quick notes here on this. Twitter has been asked to confront terrorism because apparently a lot of these terrorists are using Twitter as a recruiting tool and to spread their message. So the CEO of Twitter says he may look into it. Go right ahead, burning people. I'll consider maybe taking down their evil tweets. But in the meantime, we've got to make a profit, and so therefore, a profit overrules people being burnt alive. 9:18. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach us this morning. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from some fine sponsors in just a moment. But following that, if you'd like to reach the program, you can give us a shout at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Economic news is out today, and apparently we saw an slight uptick in unemployment, if you can actually believe the numbers. And Wall Street is not reacting well because the number of jobs created in January wasn't as high, apparently, as people had been promised. So the roller coaster ride continues when it comes to things along those lines. Oil is back up. You may see that at the gas pumps as early as today, even though that price has gone up. It's for oil that would be traded probably in late March or early April. But you know how this works. If you have a dip in prices, you might see it in a few weeks or a few days. If you have a rise in futures prices, you see it immediately. Scratch your head on that one. Then again, it's their product. We want it. They've got it. I guess they can sell it for whatever they like. More coming up on the economic news in just a few moments. Also, faith under fire. And did you know this? In neighboring Washington state, where they don't actually, they're out to protect the whales and the dolphins, they passed a law when there's been no problem actually to address. Got to get to that one if we get a chance before we wrap up today. Luckily, there's a little bit more sense in Boise than you see across, in Olympia? 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, 53 on Top Story. Not far from the lovely state of Idaho is a place you might call slightly more to the left of Che Guevara, and that's called Washington State. Happened to come across this morning as I was sitting down and doing some last-minute work before the show. This is from the Daily Caller. State with no captive whales and dolphins moves to ban captive whales and dolphins. This is what you call a solution in search of a problem, because apparently Washington State doesn't have many other troubles. 24 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I just came across this and it put a smile on my face because it shows you the daffiness I think sometimes you get with the American left. Democrats in the Washington state legislature introduced a bill that would ban putting dolphins, whales, and porpoises on display in aquariums, even though the state currently does not have any dolphins or whales in captivity. Violating the law could land you with 6-month jail sentences and a $100,000 fine. Okay, so nobody's actually even thought about breaking this proposal or this new law, but just in case, we're going to make sure that nobody has any captive whales or dolphins. I know that on weekends I like to go out and capture a few whales and bring them home and put them in the backyard pool. Sometimes I keep a dolphin or two in the bathtub, but obviously if I were living in Washington State, I would no longer be able to do that. According to the bill, even if the animal was bred in captivity and would die in the wild, the owners must keep it in a sea pen and not use it for entertainment purposes. Okay. Because, apparently if you're not paying these animals for their work, boy, are my flippers tired. I just flew in last night. Actually, probably swam in, but you get the idea. If you're not going to compensate the animal, I guess you can't have them entertaining anyone. The bill would also outlaw capturing the animals and breeding them in captivity, which, according to many zoos, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of people locking up animals so we can go stand there and watch them do naughty things in front of us, But according to a lot of the zookeepers I've talked to that I've interviewed over the years, I'm not saying it's a lot, but I have talked to quite a few doing different stories and the like in a long broadcast career. A lot of them told me that the reason that they have these animals is because they're endangered in the wild, and breeding them in captivity is one way to ensure we're always going to have a few pairs around if in case we need them. Makes sense to me. Again, apparently it hurts their feelings, and it hurts the Democrats in Washington state, their feelings even more that this actually goes on. More serious things actually take place in the state legislature in Boise. A legislative panel introduced new regulations for medication-induced abortions in Idaho that would require in-person counseling and an examination before the medication is prescribed. Now, you see, in Washington state, they're out to protect the dolphins and whales. In Idaho, they're out to protect the little babies. David Ripley from Idaho Chooses Life, and this is from the Associated Press, says Idaho's current laws are focused mainly on surgical abortions, but the number of medical abortions is growing. That is, chemically induced abortions. I know a lot of women out there say, this is all about my liberty and my right to choose, but they must know deep down in that they're not taking into account the liberty of... There was a woman named Melissa Harris Perry on MSDNC a couple of weeks ago who made a comparison to a baby in the womb as a tumor. That's what they think. I mean, that's what they literally believe. It's an inconvenience. It's not a living thing. It's an inconvenience. And it's not nearly as important as a dolphin or a whale. And these people wonder when they pass from this life why they're going to wake up burning in hell. I think it's fairly obvious. And I'm going to come right out and say it. The women who make the loudest arguments about this and the need to kill their babies off, they do it because it's a convenient form of birth control for them. And to heck with any of the moral questions about it. Let's get right down to the brass tacks on this. It's a way to simply move on, get it out of the way, and go back to hanging around the bars, doing the things you want to do, going to all the right parties, and advancing your career. I know they may not like the sounds of that, and I know that that they say, well, men are responsible too. All right, I'll hold them responsible just as much. And I'm sick to death of people saying, well, if we had that child, what kind of life would it have? I don't know. I don't know that anybody can answer that sort of thing. There have been some people who have been born with great infirmities in life and genetic issues in life. Think of Dr. Stephen Hawking, and they've gone on and become some of the top research scientists in the history of the planet. Should they have been aborted because we knew they might have an illness later in life? Who are you to make these judgments? It's absolutely insane that these people come out with these arguments. They must know, if they have any belief whatsoever in an Almighty, that the Almighty is not sitting there saying, hey, great, way to go, you got another one. No, the Almighty is pained by anything that would happen like this. And if you don't think so, then you don't believe in the Almighty. It's as simple as that. I can't see it any other way. But it does tell you one thing. You can be proud that there are people in Idaho who are at least trying to stand up and limit this in hopes of bringing it to an end, while in neighboring Washington state, they're worried about a couple of dolphins and whales doing tricks for an audience. Doesn't make me very proud sometimes when I read those things. 9:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, here till 10 o'clock this morning. And we've got a couple more things coming up still. That fellow at Gallup, the Gallup poll, who said that the unemployment numbers were a big lie, is trying to explain himself. I think he's doing a pretty good job. If we get a chance, I'd like to mention that, because I know all of you are always telling me how great the economy is and how things have greatly improved, and it's so much better than when we were kids. That's on the way at Top Story, 9:30 and 53 at our studios. Ooh, music from a movie about baseball. Spring training getting underway in just a few days. That'll help me get over my football withdrawal. 9:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller joining us right out of the break at 9:34. 53 is our temperature at our studios. You probably will enjoy some warm weather today before the rain starts tonight and through the next several days. Good morning, and you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, the abortion issue, and sometimes arguing with people over the years here in Twin, I, my wife, and other members of our church have stood out in front of Planned Parenthood and have prayed and showed support for life. And not long ago, I got in an argument with a person that Republicans, and I go, well, I'm not all for Republicans. I'm more conservative. But Republicans like to kill our youth off at 18 and 19 with war, and the Democrats are for abortion, kill them in the womb. And I go, well, there's a big difference. And she goes, how's that? I go, when you enter the armed forces, you are armed. You are going into a zone armed to fight back. I go, the fetus, the baby, is in the womb, the most protected place it can be at that time. Is it armed to fight back?
We should also point out, since the early 1970s, we've had an all-volunteer army. Those people make that decision. It's a choice they make on their own, choice being liberty, being a synonym for liberty.
And my wife, she knows that I watch TV, and we want to take care of animals. Yeah, you see all these people, let's take care of this animal and that, and they don't think twice about an unborn child.
We should also point out,
it blows my mind.
Democrat Woodrow Wilson got us into World War I. Democrat Franklin Roosevelt into World War II. Harry Truman into Korea, and Kennedy and Johnson, both Democrats, into Vietnam. So this notion that Republicans are killing off our young people sort of is a little bit warped, I would think, and somebody doesn't know their history very well.
That's the way the left likes to argue points. I mean, but when it comes to human life, it just blows my mind.
Of course, I guess
God put man over animals, gave us dominion of that, and yet they put animals over an unborn child. And like you said, they're going to have to stand in front of the Lord, and when he says, why did you kill my babies? They ain't going to be able to say much. I had
a PETA, a spokeswoman, on a radio show with me years ago. And when I got to a point where we were talking about, how mean we all were to animals, I asked her what her take was on abortion, and she said, oh, that's not our issue. I said, well, what do you mean? You're talking about protecting furry animals, but you don't want to protect babies in mothers' wombs. She said, oh, again, that's not our issue. She didn't want to talk about that. So then I said, all right, how about if I find some flies in the house tomorrow and I swat them? Are you opposed? And she said, no. And I said, all right. So in your world, some animals are more valuable than others, and clearly all are more valuable than human beings. And she was not a happy camper with me. She never came on. Of course, I invited her out for a steak dinner as well to apologize, but she never came on the show after that particular day. But the hypocrisy that they have is just, it's overwhelming.
Well, we'll all have to stand in front of the Lord. And I really think those that kill the unborn, because, Jesus said, let the children come to me. They are innocent.
Yes. Huge difference there. I thank you much for the call. I know a lot of people over the years who've gone to demonstrations and, for instance, outside Planned Parenthood offices, they get treated as if somehow that they're wackos and extremists. But you know what? You've got to have courage to do that. First of all, that's a very courageous thing to do because of all of the grief and the slings and arrows, at least in a figurative sense, you take from other people who are passing by, the mouthy, the uninformed, the irreligious. You deal with all of that, but at least what you're doing is you're standing up for a tremendous principle. And that's a very rare commodity any longer in our current lives. And I find that we have reached a point now where most people, their interest ends at the tip of their own noses. They don't even want to consider any of these things. In talk radio, they tell us, you've got to avoid this issue because, you'll drive people away. And you know what? Have we gotten that jaded that we can't simply talk about the basics of what's right and what's wrong? Coming up on 9:39, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I do think that all the polls are showing, despite what mainstream media is trying to tell you, all the polls are showing you right now that the vast majority of Americans, in particular younger Americans, are coming over to this notion about life. And science has come so far. Maybe we should have we always hear, well, we got to let science, so you conservatives don't like it. Well, science says that little baby in the womb feels pain and is far more developed than you want to give it credit for. Again, people are doing it because they want convenience. And the moral, they don't have a moral foundation, a formation whatsoever, apparently. Government, of course, has worked very hard to usurp religious faith in this country, and this is what we've wrought. I've got more coming up. Economy, mixed signals on where it's going. And a guy from Gallup, the Gallup poll, is explaining what he said the other day about the unreal jobless numbers. 54 right now at 9:40. You know, I hope that he doesn't think if he's listening online, that I'm doing this on purpose. The music was pre-programmed in, but my former co-worker Doug Beatty and I have been, during the course of the show today, we've been going back and forth instant messaging on Facebook. And of course, if you don't know this, Doug's dad played in a movie called Deliverance, and Doug got teased about certain scenes in that movie when he was growing up all the way through high school and the like. And he said that he used to, when he'd hear the music or people would bring the music up, he said he just got to the point where he was just at the end of his rope with all of the teasing and the like. So Doug and I have been instant messaging back and forth during the course of the program today when I've been in breaks. And all of a sudden, completely not planned, just out of the blue, this music was in the computer and it came up at this point. So Doug, if you are listening online, sorry about that. It was not intentional. He's got a good sense of humor about these things. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 54 at our studios, 9:45, just a few minutes away from Huckabee. The Huckabee Report coming up in just a few minutes. The fellow at Gallup the other day who said that the jobless numbers were a scam, he was invited to talk on a television program yesterday about this. Gateway Pundit was following the story. Jim Clifton is the guy's name at Gallup. He said that the unemployment numbers are a sham because simply we don't count people who no longer receive unemployment benefits, or we count people who maybe mow somebody's yard one day a week and make $20 doing it. And so those people aren't being counted in the overall numbers, which could be, well up into the double digits, maybe 1 in 5 working Americans, or at least those people who are able to work and of working age. And if you look at people who are underemployed, we may have as many as 35% of the workforce working just in, some part-time environment. And he had something very interesting to say. The unemployment rate has ticked up by 1/10 of a point for January. Just got those figures today. But he says the number of full-time jobs, and that's what everybody wants as a percent of the total population, is the lowest it's ever been. And he went on to say, in the recession, we lost 13 million jobs. And he says only 3 million have come back. He said, you don't see that in that number. I believe we have a caller joining us this morning on the program. The number is 736-0300. And you're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's up?
Good morning. Going back to Brian Shaw and his lying, the same thing happened with Hillary Clinton, and it was just kind of brushed aside. And in the last election, in the debates, Obama came out with an absolute lie. Mitt Romney tried to call him on it. The moderator even agreed with Obama. Afterwards, she at least had the decency to say she was wrong.
Right, but maybe only about one.
Like words like honesty, integrity. Are they trying to lose them from our current characteristics and things that we look for in people?
Yes, they're trying to rewrite the meaning of life. Candy Crowley, the woman at CNN, she did apologize afterwards, but maybe not even 1/10 of the people saw her apology that were watching that debate, maybe 100th
right.
of the people. John Kerry also claimed that in 1968, President Nixon sent him on a secret mission to Cambodia. Well, Nixon wasn't president until 1969. Hillary claimed to be under fire in Bosnia when, of course, video later surfaced. Otherwise, she was greeted by children who gave her flowers. There was no one shooting at her. The two of them both ended up with a reward as Secretary of State.
Yes, it's sad. It's just sad.
I would agree. We are living in a perilous new world. I thank you much for the telephone call. 9:48, you're listening to Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. A bizarro world. There's a comic strip that's called something like that. I think that's what we're in. We're in the midst of a bizarro universe, and we're dealing with that. And they're telling us this is right when we know it's wrong, and when it's and vice versa. And Again, I made the comparison the other day to the old Soviet Union. After a while, the public just lost all what you'd call trust, if they ever had any, in the system and in the institutions of not only government, but academia and so-called media. Well, I think we're seeing it here. And then they wonder why people don't show up to vote. And then they wonder why people don't believe what they're telling them and why there's so much despair in the country. You've got all of the answers. You can get away, though, with lying through your teeth on the other side of the equation if you happen to have a D behind your name. And I'm not, I'm not a cheerleader for the Republican Party, but I'm going to tell you right now, when it comes to media in this country, the establishment media is going to favor one particular political party because they don't have the depth to see the overall problems in this country. You're not talking rocket scientists. I worked in news media for the first 17 years of my broadcast career and even briefly in the newspaper business. And I'm going to tell you right now, we're not talking about the sharpest people here. These are not the sharpest tools in the shed. The elevator doesn't always go to the top floor. Everybody is just trying to get ahead and think they're going to make a buck and crawl over everybody else. And they just they have their own views that were instilled in them in their journalism schools, and that is that the lefty is always right and the righty is always wrong. Huckabee coming up in a moment. Brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Want to thank the Reverend Governor Huckabee for joining us this morning. And again, the Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. Telephone 736-6563. Bill Colley wrapping up this week's edition of Top Story with you. 9:54, we'll call it, coming up on 9:55, 54 at our studios. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Rush Limbaugh will follow Fox News at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity is up following news at 1 o'clock, and Glenn Beck is scheduled this afternoon following news at 4 o'clock. Before I wrap up, since the subject of faith came up a short while ago, I happened to see this story at Crisis Today, which is a magazine dedicated to defending traditional Christian values. There's also a story about this in a British newspaper, so this is getting some traction around the world. The Archbishop, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of San Francisco, is being attacked in media for defending the mission of Roman Catholic schools. The paper in San Francisco called the Chronicle claimed that while it will not quarrel with the Archbishop's determination to ensure that his rigid interpretation of church doctrine is taught at 4 Catholic high schools, they suggest that the Archbishop, quote, could not be more out of touch with the community he has been assigned to serve, unquote. As if somehow you're supposed to adjust God and to every new generation, no matter how naughty they happen to be. You know what used to happen to those naughty generations in the days of the Old Testament? Yeah, you understand where we're going here. The writer goes on to say at the magazine, employees of Catholic K through 12 schools in San Francisco and elsewhere have always been expected to support church teachings on faith and morals. It's a condition of employment and nothing new. The Archbishop is simply reminding workers of this by explicitly stating that administrators, faculty, and staff members are not to visibly contradict, undermine, or deny Catholic teachings on the truth of the evil of abortion and euthanasia and the sanctity of marriage between one man and one woman. This should be uncontroversial. And yet, you've got folks at a local newspaper, most of them who were raised on smoking marijuana, and of course guzzling beer after their shifts were over with every day, and engaging in all sorts of what you might call alternative sexual relationships. They are sitting there saying, nope, the church has to change to meet our opinions. And if they don't, well, they're going to be in serious trouble. You know, the Ark was very small. And there's a fellow by the name of Michael Voorhis who runs a television station in Detroit. And he talks about these matters. And he had a segment on his station about a year ago where he said, if you're not on the Ark yet, you better get on it. And all of these other people aren't going to get that opportunity. Now, he's talking in a figurative sense, but you understand the direction that we happen to be going. And this notion that somehow you need to recruit people to your faith by dumbing it down, I'm sorry, that's not the message. The message is there may only be a very few of you left at the end. That's okay. And none of them are going to be working at newspapers. I rest assured on that note. I'll tell you what, after that comment made by that goofball at the local paper a couple of weeks ago that what happened at Oklahoma City 20 years ago with the bombing of the federal building was an act of a Christian terrorist, from a guy obviously who doesn't know the story, who was probably still being wet nursed at the time when that took place. I don't think there's any hope for these people in the long run. He had said McVeigh committed that terrorist attack as a Christian, when McVeigh hadn't been to church in many years and had pretty much concluded that he was an agnostic. So the folks in media still trying to twist the story for you. If they're not being shot down while they're flying on a helicopter, they're rewriting history, telling you that Christians are going out and blowing up buildings all over America. From my perspective, I haven't seen it happen yet. But what a great job they're trying to do of putting up a smokescreen as they destroy the culture. Thank you for joining me today. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back here 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Have a great weekend.